So going forward, we will be going to discuss the accept system call. So we will going to write two applications, client.c and server.c. Client.c actually represent a client C and server.c actually represent a TCP server. So in file client.c, we will going to implement the functionality of the client, that is the client will going to initiate the request. And in server.c file, we will going to implement the functionality of the TCP server, that is receiving the client connection request, receiving the client data, processing the data, and replying back to the client. We will going to implement server functionality in server.c file and client functionality in client.c file. Now let us discuss the accept system call. First of all, accept system call is used by the TCP server. That is, accept system call is used on the server side. And what is the purpose of accept system call? The accept system call is used to accept the new client connection request by the server. So you have a client C and you have a server S. The first thing that the client has to do is to establish the connection with the server. For that, the client has to send the connection initiation request. So this is connection initiation request. In connection initiation request, the client says that, hey, I want to establish the TCP connection with you. So it says this information to the server. So the accept system call on the server side is used to accept the new client connection request. This is the purpose of accept system call. So remember, TCP is a connection oriented protocol. That is, client and server needs to establish a dedicated connection first before they can participate in any data exchange activity. Right? So the first thing that the client and a server needs to do is to establish bidirectional TCP connection before any data exchange happen between the client and the server. The client and the server has to establish the bidirectional TCP connection between them. The initiation of this connection is done by the client. And client does this by sending the connection initiation request to the server. The accept system call on the server side is actually used to process the connection initiation request triggered by the client. Let us say, for example, when you log in into Facebook, your machine sends connection initiation request to Facebook servers. Facebook servers accept your connection request using accept system call. Now, you can send data to Facebook server and Facebook servers can update your page with notification and feeds. So the sole purpose of accept system call is just to establish the connection between the two machines, that is client machine and server machine. And it is done by carrying out TCP three-way handshake. So TCP connection is established by using three-way handshake protocol. Now again, the details of the three-way handshake protocol is out of the scope of this course. If you study the TCP internal, you will also study what is three-way handshake protocol. So again, I advise you or refer you to the standard textbooks to know about the internals of the TCP. For now, the bidirectional TCP connection setup between the client and the server requires a three-way handshake mechanism. So the accept system call actually helps in achieving three-way handshake mechanism between the client and the server. So accept system call is called only on the server side and it returns a handle to the connection with the client. So accept system call, first of all, accept system call is used only on server side and it is not used on the client side. And second thing is that when the server invokes the accept system call, the accept system call returns the handle to the connection with the client. Now what is handle? Handle is nothing but it is just an integer value, say 6. So 6 actually represents a dedicated connection between the client and the server. Using this handle, server carries out all the future communication with that client. This handle is called communication file descriptor. Why it is called communication file descriptor? Because actual communication between the client and the server after the connection has been established is done using this handle. That is why it is called communication file descriptor. So you can see in the diagram you have a client and the TCP server is running somewhere in the network. The first thing the client does is to send a connection initiation request to the TCP server. So this is the step 1. Client sends the connection initiation request using connect system call. Therefore, connect system call is used only on the client side. When the server receives the connection initiation request from the client, the first thing that the server does is to accept the client connection request using accept system call. As soon as the accept system call is invoked, the accept system call returns communication file descriptor, which is nothing but an integer value. Using this communication file descriptor, the server carries out the data exchange with the client. So guys, let us discuss the synopsis of the accept system call. So let us revise. The accept system call returns a file descriptor which is called communication file descriptor and which is just an integer value. In fact, in Linux, every file descriptor is represented as integer, right? So this communication file descriptor actually represents a dedicated connection between client and the server. Server carries out all the communication with the client using this returned integer value, which we call as communication file descriptor. So above you can see given the synopsis of the accept system call. The accept system call accepts 3 arguments. The first argument is the master socket TCP file descriptor, which the server has already created when it boots up. The second argument to the accept system call is the pointer to the structure of type struct sock ADDR. This structure is defined by standard C API. So the second argument that we pass to the accept system call is actually an empty structure. Empty structure means we do not fill it with any data. When the client's connection request arrives to the server, and when the server invokes the accept system call in order to accept the client connection request, the second argument to the accept system call, that is this structure, gets filled up with the client identity. Now what is client identity? The client identity is the IP address of the client as well as the TCP port number of the client, right? So the whole purpose of the second argument of the accept system call is to retain the client identity when the server receives and accepts the client connection request. Using this information, the server can reply back to the client because the server remembers the client information, that is IP address and port number. The third argument to the accept system call is actually a constant value. So this is the synopsis of accept system call. So let us have a formal look of the arguments that is passed to the accept system call. The master socket TCP file descriptor is the file descriptor of the socket which server has opened to listen to new client connection request. And this master socket file descriptor was created using socket system call. So remember, the purpose of master socket file descriptor is to listen to new client connection request from new clients. Client ADDR, that is the second argument that is passed to the accept system call, is the structure which will carry the client information. So as soon as the client connects to the server and the server accepts the client connection request, the second argument to the accept system call gets filled up with the client IP address and TCP port number. Right? The third argument to the accept system call is the size of predefined standard structure, that is the size of struct sock ADDR, and therefore the third argument is constant. So there are some more APIs like send to and receive from, but their explicit discussion is not worth. When we will have a code discussion regarding how to implement a TCP client server program, then there itself we will discuss the send to and receive from APIs. As the name suggests, these APIs are used for sending and receiving a data by the client as well as server process. So here we have just discussed the synopsis of the accept system call and how accept system call should be used by the server in order to accept the client connection request from new clients. And remember, the return value of accept system call is the communication file descriptor, which is used by the server to carry out the rest of the data exchange or future communication with this client.